Dang, I guess you finally got good. Hello interwebs, I hope you're all doing well, and welcome to my review of Halo, the series, Season 1, Episode 5, Reckoning, or, to my reckoning, the episode where Halo went from a middling to okay science fiction series to actually solidly good. And no, I am actually not just saying that for this episode's last 10-15 minutes or so, even though those last 10-15 minutes were pretty badass and awesome. We will talk about it in just a moment. But I was actually watching the episode even before we got to the big action set piece towards the end of this episode and was thinking like, dang, this is actually like a really solid science fiction series now. Like, I'm actually really invested in the relationships and the way that the world has been built out and things like that. It is by no means a great science fiction series yet. I still do have some problems here and there that we'll talk about in just a moment. But on the whole, the series has been consistent in being able to deliver a actually solidly good story, and I'm actually getting really invested in a lot of the ways that this show has started to build out the unique relationships that it has between characters that is actually different from the relationships in the game, and it actually is taking full advantage of those differences from the game, and I really appreciated that it doesn't feel like they just changed things just to change things, but they changed things in order to tell an interesting story with those changes. And I am actually, just being honest, just very shocked this show has become as good as it has so far in such a short amount of time. Again, not fantastic by any means, but a solidly enjoyable show. But let's actually talk some of the specifics here, because I think there's a lot of points to sort of touch upon throughout this episode. Again, not just the big action set piece. First off, we do have a flashback at the beginning of the episode where we get to see that Halsey is going to different planets in order to find different children for her Spartan program. Again, if you know Halo lore, this was not unexpected. And also we learn in this moment that Captain Keyes was with her. Again, if you've read the Fall of Reach book, this was not a surprising turn of events that he was around with her. And I thought that was just going to be the reveal, but I like that revelation of Keyes being with Halsey and in with Halsey on this sort of choice to kidnap children does come back up later on in the episode. So good seeding and revelation here for those out there in the audience who may not have actually seen Halo before and been surprised by the revelation that Keyes was involved. I also liked this little sequence where we get to see why Halsey initially became interested in John in the first place, that he was sort of able to like have strength but also care and save others, which also again thematically comes up later on in the episode when Master Chief goes and saves Kai at the detriment of his own safety and the mission's safety. So again, even in this opening flashback sequence, we have little seedings of themes and ideas that will be coming back throughout the episode and are foreshadowed here. So really solidly done. Then we jump forward to the future where we're back on the same planet, and now we see that Halsey has sort of built out a kind of military encampment to try and dig out the artifact that we found last episode, and we get to see a little bit more between Miranda and Kai, and I like that these two have started to form kind of a relationship over their mutual learning to be more human, separate from Halsey's influence, and I can already tell that, number one, Kai is probably going to be my favorite character in this series, and their relationship between Kai and Miranda is probably going to be a favorite for me as well. However, this does bring me to a negative, because we do get a scene where Cortana in John's head, they're looking at the artifact, and Cortana says, you need to stay away from it because it might be dangerous because it has more power than the last artifact that you touched. Which kind of felt a little bit frustrating because, yes, that is an information that John should have, but I feel like that conversation should have happened well before this base was established. Like, they've been there probably for at least a day or two, if not longer. So I'm kind of shocked that this conversation just happened now, and it just felt like a conversation happening just for the audience's benefit. So I kind of felt the hand of the author there. Not a bad scene, but you could just sort of feel the like, all right, we need to get this information conveyed to the audience here. And also we know that as soon as Cortana says you should stay away from it, that John's not going to stay away from it. I mean, come on. But this also brings us to the Soren and Quan scenes, which I'll just sort of discuss in totality here because there wasn't a lot to them. And honestly, it's probably my least favorite part of the entire episode, where I do like that Soren's like, all right, you're going to come work for me. We're getting off this planet. You're not going to be a freedom fighter anymore. You owe me a lot of money. And he sort of straps her to the bike and runs off to try and go and get something to save them and come back for her. And Quan, being very resilient, gets herself free. And I like showing that she is strong enough and determined enough to do that. And then we got the scene where she hides herself and tries to take out Soren, which she does. Again, all fairly like beat-by-beat storytelling that doesn't really do much for me. Again, I haven't been really invested in Soren and Quan's storyline all that much. The thing that frustrated me, though, was how their storyline ended this episode with Quan pulling a gun on Soren and possibly shooting him in the head. We all know she's not going to shoot him in the head. That would be a ridiculous waste of a character and also turn me against Quan as a character overall. So that would just be a terrible decision. So I'm surprised they even bothered to leave that as the cliffhanger. And also, like, why would she even want to do that in the first place? I mean, I know she has issues with Soren and him wanting to take her with him, but he's taken care of her. He's been gruff and kind of an asshole, yes, but he's actually tried to save her life a few times, and he's generally been on her side. Again, asshole, but saved her life. So it's even weird that they would even consider, like, showing us this as a scene in general. It was just very dumb and frustrating to end there. Also, Soren leaving her in the desert sun for that little bit of time was also dumb, because, like, what if she had, like, gotten a huge sunburn or died from dehydration or something like that? That was just, the whole sequence was just kind of meh with a few frustrations. But getting back to the positives, again, I loved everything that happened on the planet as they're sort of uncovering the artifact. I love Miranda trying to get her mother's attention by saying, like, oh, look, there's some interesting stuff here, and Halsey just not giving a crap at all about Miranda. Again, I like this choice and how they've developed this choice of having made Miranda Halsey's daughter, because you get the sense that Miranda wants to have her mother's attention and just never, ever gets it. And so I thought that that was just sort of nice to sort of see that evolution here. But then on top of that, we also get a wonderful scene with Kai with her fellow Spartans as they're sort of learning the mission that they're there to protect the artifact. And she sort of starts asking, do you never wonder why? You never wonder why? About what, the Covenant's after, these sort of things. And you get the idea that these Spartans have just been so programmed because of their control chip that they just never think about things beyond what their task is in front of them. And I really liked, again, that sort of juxtaposition of Kai versus the other Spartans. Wonderfully done. And then we get another really good scene between John and Kai, where John sort of confronts her, figures out that she's removed her control chip as well, and says, like, you need to be docked, you need to be put off to the side because I don't necessarily trust your combat ability, which is something that John himself is probably putting on her because he probably feels it himself. He wonders if he's less than because of taking out his control chip, if he's less of an officer. So it's sort of him projecting onto her, and I thought that was a great way to showcase both his characters and Kai's frustration at John's hypocrisy. And then on top of that, we get a good little back and forth banter between Cortana and John as well, where Cortana's like, oh, I'm glad she stood up for herself, and John's saying, like, get out of my head, I can't hear myself think, and she's saying, there's not much you're missing there. Again, it's starting to see the little banter between these two characters that would become so emblematic of them within the games. A little bit more confrontational than they are in the games, but you're starting to see the little banter back and forth that I really think fleshes out Cortana, but also starts to showcase where these characters would, I presume, be going, which is to build out their friendship over the long term of the series. We then also get a scene where John goes to Captain Keyes and he says, he tells him what he saw with Halsey having possibly been there at his childhood, meeting him when he was a kid. And because we had the flashback at the beginning of the episode, we know that Keyes is lying to John when Keyes says, I will investigate this as soon as we get off this planet, that sort of thing. And I liked that the episode didn't beat us over the head with that. It just, we could read it ourselves, which then cut immediately to the next scene where we have Keyes, Halsey, and then the lady back at UNSC headquarters sort of debating whether or not John should be able to keep his control chip out and the dangers within that and the arguments that are having there, and Halsey being willing to keep going on this thread even though she knows the danger herself because it's getting results and that's all she cares about. She's just results driven. And then I got a little bit frustrated with Captain Keyes sort of saying that, oh, we need to take Miranda off of this project when he was the one at the beginning of the episode that put her on it in the first place. And so this sort of bait and switch, and I know Miranda calls him out on it a little bit later, but I was a bit frustrated by his character just sort of flipping on a dime. But I did like that it brought up that Halsey and Keyes were both parents of Miranda, and Halsey sort of exactly stating that, saying, oh, this is the first parenting decision that we've agreed upon. I thought that was at least good because we haven't really seen an acknowledgement that these two have a relationship and that they're also both the parents of Miranda. So nice at least acknowledging that bit. But then we have the artifact freaking out after Halsey's weird scientist dude, who, by the way, very strange man. There's at one point later on in the episode where he's being dragged away and he's like, I need to stay with the artifact. So weird dude. I'm sure that hopefully they'll explain why this guy is so strange. But anyways, he sets off something in the artifact which sends a signal out that only John can kind of stop by his presence, but it does alert the Covenant to where they are. And the Blessed One girl, whose name I forget, that is after them, is sort of looking for them and is able to figure out where they are. Thought that was cool. Again, shows John's connection to the artifact, but then I liked that John sort of used this moment to have this impetus of like, okay, why is there no information on where I came from? Why is there no information on my adoption? I'm going to use the artifact to figure it out. And he learns that Halsey was the one that kidnapped him as a small child and gave a something. I guess I'll leave it spoiler free for now if you haven't played the games or read the books. Gave something back to his parents. And so then he goes and attacks Halsey out of anger. Again, and I liked also seeing that Cortana shut him down in that moment. Again, complicated interplay between all three of these characters and where people's loyalty lie and how John is starting to shift over time now because he's lost his control chip. All of that was great. And then we also learned from there that the signal that was being sent out might be to something else. Again, I'm thinking this is alluding to Halo, like these artifacts connect together to connect to message something with the Halo ring. We'll come back to that in a little while in future episodes, I'm sure. But then this leads to the most badass part of the episode, which is the Covenant comes down and starts wrecking shit. And this was so cool on so many levels. The things that they managed to pull off in this sequence on a television budget was phenomenal. Some of the CGI here and there was a bit wonky, but overall, so cool. I mean, there's so much I could mention. You got the Banshees flying overhead, just wrecking shit. You got Jackals coming down from the Covenant carriers, just like with an energy sword, just ripping people in half. I've never seen Jackals be that particularly badass. That was cool. You had a Grunt hijacking the Warthog with the artifact on it that then Master Chief then hijacked. That was also pretty excellent. You see the ship that they were on fall out of the sky. All of that was just so incredibly cool to see. Like, this whole battle sequence was so dynamic and so awesome. The only knock I give it is there's a couple moments towards the end where we see like the first person viewpoint of the Master Chief. Didn't really need that. Felt like a weird allusion to the game. I wasn't a big fan. Otherwise though, phenomenal. But this wasn't just like big badass like bombastic moments. There was actually good character storytelling within here too, of Halsey being worried about the artifact initially, but then seeing that Miranda was in danger and then going out and risking her life to save Miranda. Again, giving that sort of affirmation of her being her mother that Miranda had been looking for by trying to showcase that she's just as smart as her mom earlier. So I liked that protective instinct she had, but that was also mirrored in the Master Chief himself, which is something we saw way back at the beginning of the episode in that foreshadowing when he was a kid, because now he has the control chip out, he's worried more about Kai, who might be dying in the battle, than he is about saving the artifact, and so he risks his life and the mission in order to go save Kai. And I like that this has consequences because the Covenant are able to steal the artifact, and we get our first look at a brute in the series, and oh boy, was that cool. Like the menacing look and like the just weight of the brute coming down, and the Master Chief was like, oh god, I'm gonna need a bigger weapon to fight this thing, but then it just sort of going off. So we now have like, oh, you've set up the Chekhov's brute that we're probably gonna have to fight at some point later on the series, and that was excellent. But I liked all this mirroring of Halsey saving Miranda, Master Chief saving Kai, and it sort of registering these questions of like human emotional instinct trumping like the sound like smart thing to do for the mission, which is what Halsey's always on the side of, that we shouldn't like think of things emotionally but just scientifically, and it's getting shown in action sequences. Just a phenomenal job just tying all these different ideas and themes together, not only in just the dialogue and characterization, but in the actual action beats of the series. Just really, really well done writing overall. And so at the end of this, well, I do have some quibbles here and there, mostly to do with the Quan and Soren storyline, which I don't really care all that much about. Overall, this was a fantastic episode, and if the show continues on this trajectory of continuing to evolve its characters and themes and ideas in all these dynamic and interesting ways, I actually see this series somehow turning it around and becoming a really, really great show, despite my, I don't want to say like middling thoughts earlier, but my reservations earlier. Like it's definitely turning around and becoming a really, really strong show so far. So keep it up, Halo. But that's all my thoughts for Halo the series. Did you like this episode? Did you hate it? Did you think all of it was badass? I'd love to hear all that down in the comments below. But beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching, my friends, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.